And pleased to be joined today by Sportsnet's Justin Bourne. Justin, first and foremost, thanks for joining us this evening. So we're chatting with you on the evening prior to Game 4 of the NHL Finals. So this is Wednesday, June 11th. Everyone will be listening to this tomorrow. But it sort of leads into the first question that I know I wanted to get to you. So between Game 3 and 4, and we saw what happened in Game 3 with the Oilers, there's the 2 days off. And it doesn't happen too often, but I found that in the finals, they tend to do that every once in a while. And with the way the Oilers kind of let off the gas pedal, for lack of a better term, in Game 3, do you ultimately think that extra day between the two games is more beneficial for Edmonton in that they get that extra day's rest or to kind of reset? Or is it almost more detrimental mentally because you have to sit and wallow in that loss for an extra day?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's great. Part of you talking about the wallowing isn't great, but I used this example on our show the other day. First off, by the way, thank you for having me, and sorry that I've been tough to get on here tonight, but I'm happy to be here now. I use this example on our show where if you look at the analytics on how power plays do in a period, they do the worst in the first minute whenever it calls clean ice, and they think it's so good for power plays, but really you've got a penalty kill that's had time to get rest. They're fresh for stops and starts and getting in lanes, and they're able to prepare for the opponent. To me, the PK in that example is Florida. They're the team. Like Edmonton is the offensive, top end guys that are going to go. And Florida's job is, can you contain McDavid and Draisaitl and RNH and, put a leash on these guys? And so I think of it as like a well-rested Florida is tough for the Oilers. They're always in the right spots. They slow you down. They're so frustrating to play. They forecheck like crazy. So, I'm not by any means writing off the Oilers, but I do think, when it comes down to rest, it does help Florida.
Mm-hmm. So when we take Game 3 and we dissect it, I guess, and look at what actually happened, we know that not only did Edmonton lose the actual game, but they actually lost the mental game. Do you think that going into Game 4, Edmonton just has to put the whole, I guess, physical side of the game to bed early and just stay away from that as much as they possibly? Obviously, there's going to be moments in the game where they have to stick up for themselves, and obviously it's the hockey code. But is there moments where they cannot have what happened in Game 3 to them happen in Game 4 to win the game, or is that going to be possible to win?
Yeah, I do think it's you hear teams say that phrase that is so cliche, but the flush it, throw it out, you just move on. But you think back to the Stanley Cup Final last year, I think people forget sometimes Florida got trounced twice.
Yes.
They lost 6-1 and 8-1.
Yeah.
And they won the Stanley Cup still. It didn't necessarily mean it was a complete death blow. So you have to just act like the next game's a new game and you have another chance at it. My major concern, if I were coaching the Oilers right now, is I don't think you can go into a game against the Florida Panthers being watch your sticks, take it easy out there. I just think it gives them license to do what they always do. It gives them more space. It makes the game easier on them. I think you have to keep playing hard and physical and hope the calls go your way next time. If you look, I think in the regular season, the most penalized team in the NHL was Florida. And then you get in the playoffs and the refs call less and they try to even it out. And so there's an advantage to being the team that just continues to take infractions, challenging the refs to call it. So I would hate to tell the Oilers, careful out there. The last thing I'd want to put in their head, I just go be yourselves. And if we take a couple, we're going to have to kill them.
I do have a follow-up to that, though, just on the sense of you're talking about less calls. It really has not been less calls in the first period of the games. We've seen games 2 and 3, they've been calling a lot in the first period of the game, and then by midway through the second period, other than the absolute UFC fight, if we're referencing Leon in the third period, they put the whistles away. But how important is it to not go into the box if you're Edmonton in those first 10 minutes of the game where the referees seem to be calling a lot more to set the tone of the game?
Yeah, it's huge to not be on the wrong end of the special teams battle, but there's a great article, one of my favorite pieces of analysis that I think isn't referenced enough, by Dom Lecision, and it was written last year or the year before, and it's on penalty calls and when they happen in the playoffs and over the course of the series. in games 1, 2, and even 3, there's a lot of calls. Like refs like try to set a tone. This is not going to be a mayhem out there. We're calling this thing tight. And there's less calls in game 4 and less calls in game 5 and so on. There's no calls in game 7. It's figure it out, boys. So, I think, and it happens over the course of a game too, that there are more calls in the first period, less in the second, less in the third. So the deeper you get into this series, I think you have to just hope that continues, or not hope, but at least play in a way that assumes it's going to continue, because it's historical, this data, that refs don't want to be the one who decide the game. Now, the one catch there is if it's Wes McCauley, because Wes, it's his show. Wes wants people to know who's ref in the game. So I think that you do need to at least be aware of who the official is when the puck drops.
Yeah, and I mean, how much do you think that helps Florida then? Because you wrote about it today that they have such a rare combination of toughness and offense and defense and goaltending. It seems like the more open and available they're able to get on the ice, they can make plays as well as still suffocate you defensively and in your own defensive zone. So as the game will continue to open up as the series goes on, do you think that only helps Florida more as the game kind of allows them to kind of play to their style?
Yeah, I totally do. And so then this series is like, how does Edmonton win this series? It's only 2-1. And every time we count them out, for years now, the last couple of years, they don't die, right? They don't go easy. So how do they end up winning this series? Like, is there another path aside from David and Draisaitl have 14 points between now and the end of the series each, and Stu Skinner blacks out? And I could be back on the show with you guys in 14 days, and the two things I said could have 100% happened, and they could have won the cup. That might happen. But beyond that, it's hard to be like, boy, Janmark and Kapanen got hot. And, it just doesn't seem like that's how that story ends. So, yes, if it remains like it is and there's room out there, Florida's going to pick them apart. They have 6 guys on their team who have Selke votes in the past few years. And, 4 or 5 that have Hart Trophy votes, and they're pretty loaded, boys.
Yeah. It's one of the deepest teams I think I've ever seen in terms of modern NHL, because like what they've been able to do with the salary cap, and like how Bill Zito, like there's so much on this no tax state, and like Bill Zito gets an advantage there, but honestly, like he's done such an incredible job with like constructing that team and like getting contracts signed at perfect times where it looks like absolute bargains in like 2 to 3 years with these guys. Now, going back to game 4 for the Edmonton Oilers, who needs, like, obviously we have 97 and 29 that are going to have to play better, but who needs to be that third guy without Hyman in the lineup that needs to step up? Is it Kane? Because it feels like it has to be a spot where Kane has to come in and deliver what Hyman was doing for the first 3 rounds of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
That's it. I mean, that's, the lack of Hyman thing is actually really sad, because I feel like not just for the Oilers and their fans, but we all deserve to see the best on best. And it felt like we got the 2 best teams. And Hyman is, last year in their playoff run, I don't know how many goals he scored, but I know regular season and playoffs, I think he scored 70 times total.
Yes.
So,
he did.
So you take that out of the lineup, and not to mention he's the guy who hits the most for them. He will fight. He's physical. That's a massive loss. So, yes, Kane needs to be that. I think Trent Frederick is a guy who has scored, he's got a 20-goal season on his resume. He's only 27 years old. And he hasn't quite been right since the knee surgery. Hasn't found his way back. So a guy like him could step up and have a little bit more. But then the only other guy on that team where you're like, this guy can be a major impact guy is Bouchard. And he has been awesome. Like, he's a great guy, a great player for them. He needs to continue to provide offense from the back end, like at least a point per game type of guy. They, as much as I talk about those top guys, they're going to need some help from other places. So, it's tough without Hyman.
Yeah, Brandon referenced an article that you wrote, your most recent article, that kind of dived into the idea that GMs are going to start looking and picking apart and copycatting, Panthers, there's no pun intended there, but, that style, that structure, and the way that teams build.
So mad I missed that pun in my article.
I know. If your editor could sneak it in there last minute, I have to make the change. No, but, obviously that can't just be replicated by grabbing Panthers players, as you mentioned, and kind of slotting them into places that teams are missing. It's a culture, and it's built by committee. But I'm just sort of curious, when you pick apart this Panthers team, where do you think that culture really started? Was it bringing in Paul Maurice? Was it Tkachuk that kind of, do you think, brought it in? Or was it just the emergence of a bunch of guys at once? I'm just curious if you have a thought on where this culture and kind of where this team structure started.
God, I love that question. I think it's a fascinating one to pursue. The year before Paul Maurice got there, they finished first in the NHL in goals for and 12th or 13th in goals against. They were really good. I think people forget how good they were pre-Maurice. But then Maurice got there, and the next year they were first in goals against and 12th or 13th in goals for. So they kind of flipped how you would define them as a team when Maurice got there. Tkachuk's certainly a big part of that. And I think part of it with Tkachuk is like, my whole thing is these teams that win convince great offensive players to play defensive hockey. Because in playoffs, you're just waiting for an opening, and you need these skill guys to be able to put them away. We talk about the Leafs on our show. You think about the breakaways they get against Florida in that last game. It's Lorentz and Lawton get their breakaways, I think.
Yeah.
That's not the same as Sam Bennett getting your breakaway. Or, so they have these skill guys that have committed to playing defense. And so I think Maurice gets credit there. But then when you get the buy-in from guys like Tkachuk and Bennett and Reinhart, and I think you get the buy-in because Barkov has always done that.
Yeah.
He is, you said for years in Boston with Patrice Bergeron, geez, I don't know what it is about their culture. Whoever steps into Boston it works. They figure it out. And Bergeron was always there for them. In Pittsburgh, for years, there's that great tweet about Mark Donk and Buzz Flibbit have 60 points with the Penguins. And who are these guys? But it's the culture there that Crosby set because he played the 2A game. And that, to me, is Barkov, where you have a guy, the most important guy on the team, who does it. And so how can you say you're not going to do it? I think that's kind of the head of the snake there.
Especially when you're a guy that's only, you're making $10 million, but you're still underpaid at $10 million.
Yeah.
He's been incredible for the Florida Panthers, setting that culture. When talking about the Florida Panthers, we can't not talk about Brad Marchand. Like, Brad Marchand, what a perfect fit it was. Like, everyone at the trade deadline knew this was going to be the perfect fit. Like,
Leafs fans did.
Yes, exactly. Leafs fans knew exactly the moment that they traded. The chance of the cup was basically locked, sealed, and delivered at that point. But has Brad Marchand played himself into a pay increase? I would say, like a upgrade in pay.
Everyone I've talked to about it says he's getting $8 million. He's 8 times 3. Who wants to be the team to pay it? And I think if you're for almost any team with a serious Stanley Cup chance, how could you not willingly do it? It's funny. I watched him in the Four Nations and I was like, he can't play at that speed. The game is too fast. He's not able to keep up. But in NHL playoffs, they're not all-star teams. These teams have third lines and fourth lines, and there's your D, you have second pair and third pair guys where Marchand can still get in behind him, get these breakaways, get his chances, and he's just too smart. So, yeah, I think you'll have teams lining up to pay him, so he probably gets up to that $8 million mark. Does he do what everyone else has done in Florida and say, yeah, I'll do it for 6.8 here or whatever, it ends up being? I could see that happening for sure, but there's no doubt that someone like myself went into this year with questions. Four Nations, I was like, he can't keep up anymore. You watch him playoffs, go, oh, right. Yeah, he's still that guy.
Yeah, like it's something about showing up in the big moments, and some players have it, some players don't, and just something about him, he's always had it. Like, I remember watching him at the 2016 World Cup of Hockey. Yeah. That was Canada. I'm pretty sure it was against Finland, and he scores the game-winning goal with like 20 seconds left in the third period. And like at that point, like, he wasn't like a guy that was supposed to be on that team. I don't think. Like, he wasn't like a massive like name that was like he's locked to be on that team.
Coming into his like Hart Trophy vote years there.
Yeah, exactly. And like ever since then, it feels like the career of like a Hall of Famer has taken off, and he's just been the instant killer for a lot of teams.
Yeah, he's got
So
those Justin Williams vibes, right? Like where it's just
absolutely.
unfazed, big game sort of player. You know what's going to find him somehow in the big moments.
I actually have just a quick question, like about him. Do you ever get annoyed with his off ice antics, like about like
shut
praising
up. All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Like, I see them like shooting the rats at him after the game. I'm like, the guys enjoy that? Or is that funny to someone? Like, I don't, but there is something that he's like not afraid to put himself out there. I think in the last game, the Oilers took 4 penalties in the first period, and he's going to the bench like after they score, like, keep your composure, keep your cool. Those sort of chirps can come back and bite you, if it doesn't go well. But he doesn't seem to care or worry if he gets embarrassed. Like he lays it on the line and lets it fall how it may. And that's an admirable trait in anyone.
Yeah. Like even like last year when the Leafs came back from 3-1, it just didn't seem like, I know he said like after, I think it was game 3 or game 4 when he said like, you could see him on the TV. He said it's over, like they're done. And then like they come back and they tie it, and obviously everyone knows Boston wins game 7, but like it's still at that point, it didn't seem like it phased him that like those words had kind of like he had kind of shot himself in the foot there, in the mouth, and like they came back, but like he's just the killer. I don't know what it is about him. He's got that killer instinct.
Yeah, and how do you quantify that? How do you value it? If you're a GM, like, are you sure you're going to get that? Like, I always worry about paying someone who's done it in the past rather than what you're going to get in the future. But I don't really worry about like his sample size is long enough that it's like, okay, that's a real quality he possesses. The puck didn't bounce to him twice, and we've gone, oh, wow, he put a couple lucky ones away. He creates a lot of big moments. Getting that overtime winner against Edmonton, he's still sniffing for breakaways at that point in the game. Like he's in the moment, and it's the real deal with him.
Talk about not a big sample size. I think one of the player that everyone comes to mind is Sam Bennett. When you talk about the sample size there, his first year hitting 50 points. Before he went to Florida, he was a bust. He was known as a bust. He was not known to be a great 4th overall pick as what you hope to get out of a 4th overall pick.
Yeah.
Goes to Florida, he turns his career around. He turns into one of the best playoff performers. Is he worth the money that he's going to get? Like, I think when looking at him on a contract, you're more so not paying for the regular season. You're paying for the playoffs with him. Was that right?
Yes, it is. And I'll be honest, like I am really torn on this one. It depends what the number is, but the agent for this guy, the agent that seems to be trying to establish, I think in psychology, you call it like an anchor, like an anchor number, like people float it out there and say, oh, he's going to get 12 or whatever. And then when people get him for 10, they feel like they got a deal. Yeah. It's like, are we going to have a 50-point guy, $10 million? It feels pretty insane because you then are talking about the thing we just did with Marchand. Do you think he's that? Do you think he's this killer instinct guy that's going to keep being this guy? There is part of me that's like, all right, so let's say you give him 10 million times 7 years or something like that. And this is his career high in points. So now he's a 40, 45 point guy who is like, how much better is he than like Scott Lawton at that point? It's like Scott Lawton plus a few points, plus a few hits. Like it's just, there is a downside to a Bennett contract. That's very real. I want this Conn Smythe Bennett on my team. I'd pay anything to have that. But I don't know. How sure are you that you're going to get it? The Bennett one totally scares me.
Yeah. Is that your pick, by the way? Just sorry to jump in, Brandon. Would that be your choice? I mean, I tried to do some research. I can't think of another time a pending UFA has won a Conn Smythe. It hasn't happened. Is he your pick right now, or do you see anyone else kind of surpassing him? If the Oilers win, clearly, but who's your pick right now?
It is him, but I will say I've kind of been making the case. Like if you could say, like if we go in a time machine, go back to the start of every game in this series and rerun it without Bennett and then rerun it without Barkov, is their record better after which, it's like Barkov plays 4 more minutes per game than him against the opposing team's top line so that he is free to do his thing on the second against second lines. And, to me, Barkov probably the more important player, but Bennett's got 14 goals in 20 games. The bigger moments, the more highlight reel worthy stuff. He's definitely going to win it if they just win the next 2 games.
Yeah.
So, do you, Brandon, go ahead if you had a question.
Well, I was just going to ask, like, what is it, Justin, that you make? Like, what do you make of Bennett's ability to just kind of turn it on? At least we've seen in the last couple of years. And do you think that's sustainable, whether he stays in Florida or goes somewhere else? It seems like obviously in Florida, that's the more likely spot because of everything you just outlined with his ability to play on a second line and kind of contribute in a different way. But I wonder, like, do you think we see him maybe have a more productive regular season going forward? Or do you think it's just this is his level and he's just able to turn it up in the playoffs?
Yeah. It's tough to see me thinking that there's a level beyond this. He's 29, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. I believe that top pedigree guys can be better later in their careers than, just guys who have nice peaks. Like, you look at whether it's Jason Spezza reinvents himself or Corey Perry or Brad Marchand. These are guys who came into the league as like, these guys are players. We knew they were players and they showed up and they were players. Bennett was a really high pick. He was a pedigree guy that people expected to produce in the league. It did take him a lot longer to find his footing than people expected. But I got to believe, if you're a team that's not Florida, that means you can get him for 7 years. I got to believe Bennett's got 4 years here where he's going to be this Bennett, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And I think at that point, you got to eat the risk on that and say, yeah, okay, let's see what he's got in the last 3. By then the cap's going to be 130 million and maybe it won't hurt as much. So I am torn, but I do think I would do it.
You don't think though, like the one thing I've been thinking about like a lot with Bennett is like the team. Do you think the team matters for him?
Yeah. So he's the perfect guy, actually. If you took him and said, we're going to put him on the Ducks and he's going to turn this team around, no chance. Like he is not moving the needle on his own. He's not a top line guy without other great guys. But I do think that on a good team, God, he's such a nice second layer of, you guys know all the stuff he does, including injure the opponent, which is very helpful. But no, I don't think he can carry the mail, which is why it's scary to be like, all right, you want to get paid more than, who makes 9.5 at this point? A lot of very good players, but you're getting into David Pasternak money at some point. It's like, let's not give him too much credit here.
Yeah.
I have 2 more questions, unless you guys have any more.
I just had the one because we did a lot of Florida conversation, which is valid. Obviously, they're dominating here, but the Oilers are obviously still in this. And I think one guy that somehow probably the quietest Oiler is the guy on the bench, Chris Knobloch, and for good reason. He's a calm demeanor. He didn't really fit in Sunrise when his whole team was going crazy in Game 3. He's the same guy whether they're winning or losing. And I'm just wondering if you had any idea, if you had to guess, what you think his message to the Oilers would be ahead of Game 4, or if it's not him, does a McDavid, a Perry, a Draisaitl, do you think step up to say, whatever he has to say to kind of get this team on the right gear here? Do you think one of these guys steps up? What happens here?
It's funny with Knobloch, right? Because it kind of feels like he was installed to be like, this is McDavid's team. And when Connor's going to let you know what's happening, when it's happening, and you just kind of stay out of the way, open the gate. And that is greatly minimizing a guy who, if you talk to Oilers fans, he's just constantly pushed the right button for them. But he's not an inspiring figure. You can't pretend that he is. God, we had him on our show once. He's pretty monotone and steady. Yeah. So I do think that has to come internally. And none of us, we're all thinking about the McDavid dig in thing, we know how bad he wants it. And we just talked about how Barkov is the guy who people go as he goes, and Crosby set his team's culture. And I think Nate McKinnon does that, and Bergeron does it. I think McDavid does that too. So it's going to come from the players in that Oilers dressing room. And the only thing I'm curious with Knobloch is if he goes back to Skinner or goes with Pickard, but that's the one I'm waiting on.
Yeah, that's the thing that did very surprising. Like, he hasn't committed to either goalie. You would assume he's going back to Skinner for Game 4 at this point. Stuart Skinner at Game 4. It's like Clay Thompson in Game 6. It's just
he's unbeatable.
Like, it's crazy. But my final two questions for you is right now, where we are in the series. Like, I know when you made your pick, like you might have thought a little bit different, but right now, where are you sitting with your pick? Are you feeling okay? Are you feeling edgy with it or what?
Nah, I feel like Florida's going to win the series. I didn't, I picked Edmonton to win the series, but the lack of Hyman is noticeable. Skinner hasn't been as good as they need him to be, and Florida's healthy. Like there's, you look at their lineup and it's just like they've barely played. Like they outside the Leafs series, I think they played 5-game series. This series it started June? I don't know. It feels like
June 4th.
June 4th, and they had 6 days prior to that off.
Yeah.
6 days, and then now multiple days between games, multiple times. Like, I just think they're kind of at peak capacity. It's really hard to see them losing 3 out of 4 times now.
Yeah. I just follow up that. If Edmonton wins Game 4, they even the series up at 2. Does that change your, or do you still think like it's Florida's at the end of the day? Like we're just going to see
it. It's like is Skinner red hot? Does he make 40
Yeah, true.
And, it's if they sneak by, McDavid scores 5 times and they win 7-6, and Skinner still can't stop a puck. I'm not believing in him.
Different story.
I think it depends how it happens.
A week and a half ago, like everyone, including myself, was like, history's just rewriting itself here. Like it's Gretzky, it's Crosby, and then it's McDavid. He's going to do it the exact same way, and Florida might just be building a dynasty. That's what might be happening here. Yeah. We can't let you go because you obviously run a show called Real Kipper and Bourne with the Leafs Hour. Obviously, Sammy's like very passionate, I would say. He's been passionate about this all season. So is Mitch Marner. The whole situation right now. I like, you guys have obviously debated like what he's worth and stuff, but if the Leafs were to sign him tomorrow to a contract that is 8/13 or 8/13.5, are you thinking that this team is going to win the Stanley Cup, or is it over?
Yeah, God, man, this one kills me. It's like that's like kind of the exact number where it's like with Marner, it's always felt like he's just need to wring that extra 2% out of them, where it's just like it's not helping us. Like, yeah, maybe he's worth it, but it's just not helping. And your problems are kind of the same. It's at that point you would have to know, like, are you then trading Nylander? And not bringing back Tavares? Like, you would have to you cannot bring back the same hockey team. Like,
no, you can't.
You can't. And not even the same team. You can't bring back all the core guys. And just being without Tavares is not the answer either. So if you bring him back, you'd have to tell me you're trading Nylander at that point, which listen, fine. Just something's got to happen here. Something's got to give. Mitch's contract happens to be up, but I think he'll end up taking $12 million somewhere else, and at the end of the day, the Leafs end up having to kind of figure out how to do it from there. And if it is bet on guys like Bennett and Marchand and hope they want to come to Toronto, they may have to throw some dollars at them. So I wish I know more info than anyone else. It's just like, I hope they have a good offseason because they need one, boy.
Yeah, exactly. Like they desperately need one. Obviously, we know that Brad Treliving wants to change the DNA. We're going to see what his DNA is made of this offseason as well. Right. It's an offseason that's just going to be, it can be disastrous, or it can look like they won the offseason.
By July 4th, we have a show the day or two after free agency, and I'm sure we'll have a full conclusion on whether they're going to win the cup or not.
Okay.
Yeah, like it's,
oh man,
it's either going to be you take Marner's money that you would have used on him and I guess liquidate that into multiple players to make a more balanced attack up front, or you go and you sink the money into Marner. And I have one last question. Yeah. For a team like for Marner, this is like I've said this to a couple like Leafs fans because I'm a Habs fan. I grew up on the East Coast. This feels like the weirdest UFA in the history of any sport that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
For the reason of this is a top 20 player in the league at his best. He is like undoubtedly makes your team better. And we're heading into an offseason where he's becoming an UFA. And usually for every other sport, we saw that with Kevin Durant, when he left, every single person in OKC wanted to pitch him to stay at that moment in time. And instead with Marner, everyone wants him out of town. Is this like the weirdest thing for like the biggest UFA possibly to hit the market since Tavares?
Yeah, it's funny when you look for like NHL comparables, people are like, well, Artemi Panarin went to market. And it's like, yeah, that's not Artemi. He wasn't winning Selkies or, he wasn't up there. And, you try to think of the other big names. It is pretty unheard of for a guy at this point in his career. And to also have the team be like, we're not really sure if we want him either. I wonder how much that permeates other teams. Like, guys, they're not watching Marner in the playoffs. They know what's happened. So are they having the same conversation? Hey, are we sure? We're Anaheim. Are we sure we want to do 14 for a guy who doesn't get points late in series? Or, I'm sure those conversations are happening too. So I'm curious to see his priorities. I think we're going to find out what he values by what he does on July 1st.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting
100%.
offseason. Boy, it'd be weird to see Brad Marchand in blue and white, too. If that ends up happening, just to be an interesting offseason nonetheless for this
feels like
team.
it's going to happen. I feel it, not Bennett, but I think it's going to be
Lock it
Marchand.
in. Let's see it.
Let's go.
He said he would.
Let's see it.
He said he was open to anyone.
Yeah.
Whoever's willing to pay.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Money.
But before we get to that, obviously, we still have to wrap up this series. So, Justin, thanks first and foremost for joining. I know it was a crazy night for you, but we're really glad you were able to take the time. So we really appreciate it. And we're excited just as much as you are to watch Game 4 and the rest of the series play out. And we'll see if we get the first Canadian team in a few years to take this one. But if not, appreciate your time either way. And we'll talk another time soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me.